Hi, I'm John Strum, and this past fall, I attended ECTRIMS, the largest MS research conference in the world. During the conference, I had some quick conversations with some of the experts who were on hand to present their work to the more than 9,000 attendees. In a moment, we're going to see one of those conversations. And then you'll hear from some folks who are living with MS who are going to share their perspectives on the topics we discuss. I'm at ECTRIMS 2023 in Milan, and I'm speaking with Dr. Robert Motl. Dr. Motl is a professor in the Department of Kinesiology and Nutrition, as well as a professor in the Department of Rehabilitation Sciences at the University of Illinois, Chicago. Dr. Motl has generated an entire body of research validating the benefits of common physical activity for people living with MS. And he just gave a presentation here at ECTRIMS on exercise, brain health, and MS. Dr. Motl, thanks for joining me today.
John, thanks for having me.
I think everyone is familiar with the concept of exercise to help maintain a healthy body, but we probably don't think about it as often as an important tool for maintaining a healthy brain. Can you explain the concept of what brain health really is all about and the relationship between exercise and brain health?
Yeah, that's a great question, John. To me, brain health is having a brain that has the strongest integrity and strongest connectivity. That is, the brain is very strong and very healthy, and its areas are communicating very well together. And exercise is a stimulus that activates the brain. Exercise is a stimulus that activates the brain because the brain has to control what we do when we're exercising. And so our ideas are that exercise, by activating the brain, stimulates the brain to become more healthy and do a better job at regulating exercise behavior.
So now that we have an idea of what brain health is about and how exercise impacts brain health, how does that relate to multiple sclerosis?
Yeah, that's another great question. So we know that multiple sclerosis is a disease that causes deterioration of different areas of the brain and how those areas of the brain communicate and interact with one another. And so those are cardinal hallmark features of the disease. And so what's really important here is that we can study exercise as a way of maybe restoring the structure of these different areas, improving the connection of these areas, or maybe even slowing down the rate that the disease has in eroding these areas of the brain over time and their connections.
Can you talk about the kinds of benefits that exercise or physical activity can deliver to someone who's living with MS?
Yeah, I think the most important benefit is that it helps you to do the things that you love to do on a daily basis. So we always start with those things as salient outcomes. So for example, people will tell us, I really love to garden. And since I have had MS, I can't garden any longer. And so getting someone back to doing those things that they miss doing, that MS has kind of taken away from them, to me is one of our biggest starting points. But that doesn't really sell well in kind of medicine. That sells at the personal level. So we also focus on all the other things. So cognition is a major function that deteriorates with multiple sclerosis. So we study the effects of exercise on cognition to show that exercise can improve cognitive function or walking function. To me, the biggest benefits are things that affect almost everybody with MS, like fatigue and depression. And we know that those have such profound effects in people's lives. And we know on the flip side that exercise can reduce the fatigue that people are experiencing, not make it worse, but actually reduce the fatigue that they're experiencing. It can improve their mood, make them less depressed, less anxious. And those things translate into improved quality of life, which at the end of the day, living a life of high quality and value, isn't that our ultimate goal?
Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned that exercise can actually improve how you manage your fatigue. I think that's kind of a counterintuitive idea, but you've shown it's a valid idea.
Yeah, I think all of us, when we engage in a bout of exercise, even regular exercisers, when they're done, they're a little tired, right?
Right.
But as we repeat that bout of exercise over and over and over again, we actually become less tired from that bout. And that adaptation translates into everyday tasks and things that we do that that normally might drain us a little bit, but now we have the reserve and the capacity to buffer against those things that drain us and make us fatigued. So it is a little counterintuitive, but I think if you think about repeatedly being exposed to something, we develop a tolerance to it, and that tolerance translates.
You know, a moment ago, I heard you mention something about ideas that sell well and ideas that don't sell as well. Your work provides evidence that physical activity is beneficial for people living with MS. But for many people with MS, just like people who don't have MS, the motivation to maintain an exercise regimen may start out strong, but it doesn't always last. There aren't a lot of ways that someone living with MS can actually do something for themselves that will improve their overall quality of life. Exercise does that. How do we get more people to get that message?
Yeah, that's kind of the lifeblood of my work. That is, we have the data to suggest exercise is beneficial. Now the question is how do we get more people engaging in this life-altering behavior? And I think we have to start with that message that exercise is probably one of the most potent and effective things that you can engage in, and help people understand that, and then personalize it. We all have our own personal reason for doing the things that we do on a daily basis. And I think it becomes very salient to find those personal things. If I can give you a quick story.
Sure.
I once had a participant in a randomized controlled trial that we were doing who came to me and said, Rob, I want to do your trial because I need to improve my walking because my son's getting married in 6 months. And I'm thinking, wow, that's a pretty big ask, because she came in her power wheelchair, right?
Boy.
She could still walk, but that's how she came in. Suffice it to say, she did a 6-month multimodal exercise training program, and she went to her son's wedding, and she was able to walk him down the aisle. But that wasn't the most profound thing. She came back and told me, Rob, not only did I walk him down the aisle, I was able to dance with him that night.
Wow.
And so to her, she had this really deep personal reason for engaging in exercise. She was able to accrue that and actualize that. She's been a lifelong exerciser since.
So like a lot of things in life, you have to find your why.
Absolutely.
Last year, you and Dr. Brian Sandroff, who happens to be your co-presenter here at ECTRIMS, published an article that suggested that neurologists should do more than just tell their patients that exercise is good for them. You suggested they take a more active role in prescribing exercise. Can you talk about what that role might encompass?
Yeah, so that idea that the neurologist needs to be front and center in the exercise prescription might seem counterintuitive because they have so much to do during a patient visit. But we had done interviews with well over 100 individuals with multiple sclerosis, and we asked them a simple question: who do you want your exercise prescription and information to come from? And uniformly, they said the neurologist. Now, that hurt me deeply as a kinesiologist, but that was the uniform message that we heard. And they heard that the neurologist is this person because the neurologist knows them fundamentally, knows what their needs are, what their deficiencies might be, and can help them understand what the exercise program is that they really need to do. And so we also did talk to the neurologist and asked them about this very question. And they said, yeah, we'd be happy to do it, but we need tools, we need resources, we need all the things to put this in place. And so there's actually a toolkit for this that we've created now that can help the neurologist understand the basic things that they need to do in about 2 to 3 minutes, to ask the questions and to motivate the person to initiate this program. And then the nurse and the rest of the healthcare provider team can help to put the program in place and support it. And every time that the patient comes back to see their neurologist, this is a point of contact and a point of discussion again. How are things going? What do we need to do? How do we change? And I think that if we integrate it efficiently and seamlessly into the patient visit, this is probably the biggest bang for our buck in exercise promotion.
Makes sense. Dr. Robert Motl, thank you for all you do to improve the quality of life for people who are living with MS. And thanks so much for talking with me today.
Thanks for having me, John. And this is my life mission, to improve the lives of people with MS through exercise.
I'm John Strum, and this Real Talk MS ECTRIMS Extra was made possible by a grant from Sanofi.
We've just watched my conversation with Dr. Robert Motl, and joining me to provide some perspective from people who are living with MS are Veronica Lewis and Luis Guerra. Luis, Veronica, welcome.
Thank
Glad to be
you.
here.
Thank you for having us.
Yes.
Veronica, when were you diagnosed with MS?
I was diagnosed with MS in 1996, actually January 26th of 1996.
Everybody remembers that date, don't they?
Yes, it gets embedded.
You just heard Dr. Motl talk about the benefit of exercise for people living with MS. So let me ask you, is exercise currently part of your daily routine?
Yes, exercise has always actually been a part of my daily routine. I was previously a dancer, so I've always been in the of moving. I've always been into sports. So yeah, I've always been active in some type of athletic.
Can you tell me about the kind of physical activity you do?
Well, right now, what I'm doing a lot of is functional exercise, and that's one thing I wanted to really kind of talk about. Is I've been limited a little bit, but I now do a lot of functional exercises at home. So I still work out with exercise equipment and things like that, but I do a lot of functional exercises in my home life, in my daily housework, doing squats and lunges and calf lifts and things like that, just on a daily basis,
Mhm.
just to keep myself moving. Yes, I do have time occasionally to use my exercise equipment. I have a total gym, an exercise bike, and a tread. But I like to really incorporate more of doing functional exercises to keep myself active.
I'm curious, has your neurologist ever recommended exercise to you or inquired about whether you're doing any exercise yourself?
Well, I would say no. And that's a subject that I push. I am an MS self help group leader, and I always push my group to exercise. And as being diagnosed in the 90s, exercise really wasn't pushed. And that's really not a conversation that we've actually really had. Say that he actually did it. I just kind of like threw it out there myself that these things what I was doing. And he was like, well, that's, basically good. But it's never really been a conversation. And I'm really glad where we are now that that is coming up as a conversation, to see exactly how people are staying and how they are moving.
Luis, can you tell us when you were diagnosed with MS?
Yeah, absolutely. I was diagnosed a little more than 2 years ago, November 21st, 2021. But I probably had been living with MS. I'm 48 for 20-ish years, but we couldn't figure this out. Like all of these symptoms were just like, nah, a lot of it was it's in your brain or it's in your mind. A lot of it's like, nah, that only old people have these issues, whether it was bladder or joints or like, I was like, are you sure? So I got tested for many things. And it eventually led me down a path where my primary care physician was just probably tired of seeing me, and she sent a sub and they flagged it. And they're like, that sounds like multiple MS, or multiple sclerosis. It took about 8 months after but eventually I got diagnosed, and thank goodness, because at that point things had gotten really bad in my body. They'd really like taken a turn. And so I'm just very thankful that I was exercising. I was doing a lot of yoga, and I was doing a lot of dietary. I was really trying to keep myself healthy most of the time, not all the time. And that it was just really confusing, I think, for my physicians and whatnot. But eventually I got diagnosed. Thank goodness.
I'll ask you the same question I just asked Veronica, and I think I heard you start to answer it. You were exercising up until the time you were diagnosed. Is exercise currently part of your daily routine?
It is. I've been part of the UCLA health system for a long time. And my neurologists are pretty like they're constantly doing experiments and, small studies and research studies. And I live close to the ocean. So they've always encouraged me to like get out and swim. But as MS has gotten worse, in over the years, my legs I do deal with spasticity, and so it is encouraged very much from both. I have two neurologists. I have like one that kind of focuses on more general issues around neurology, and then I have one that's an MS specialist, and they both really do very much think that movement it's so important. And I had one the other day, actually at my last appointment, asking me about yoga. Do you still do yoga, Luis? Are you still, because I did have an injury a few years back, but they've been asking me if I've been stretching. So I stretch throughout the day, and I work out and I lift weights. I'm in touch with a MS patient, in the UK. She was written about, and there was an article, and I read this article. I was like, I think she's 70-ish. And she started doing weightlifting. I was like, how is she weightlifting, just in general? And she's actually like doing really well. And so she and I have been corresponding once a month. And she's very much encouraging me for MS specifically too. She's like, start strengthening your muscles and your bones. The sooner you get on that, the easier it's going to be to deal with, progression and instability and immobility or lack of mobility. So I'm a firm believer in fitness. I have been, and even more so now.
There's an awful lot of evidence that shows people with MS can experience real benefits from physical activity and exercise. So, this is something that's been shown to improve someone's quality of life. It could help better manage some of their MS symptoms. And it isn't another pill or injection or infusion. Luis, what do you think has to happen to get more folks with MS to start exercising?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think our culturally, like living in America, I think a lot of people are just sedentary, and I think our diet it's not easy. Like we're all like, we lose time. So there's that kind of shift the mindset. But with regards to MS, I think it is absolutely a conversation that has to happen, not just at the neurologist's office, but I think that one thing that I seem to be missing, at least in my research and my own personal advocacy, patient advocacy journey, is nobody is like, there's a ton of information, there's a ton of studies, there's a ton of resources, but no one is sort of like making it accessible to people. And I don't know how you do that, if it's mobile technology or a podcast. I know you have the podcast, but like how many people are listening to the podcast? That's always a question, right? How do we do that? I don't know, but that would be a great topic, right? Like fitness is, and I think some people, like what Veronica was mentioning, I think earlier, because I know people that have had MS, like they were diagnosed in the 90s and early 2000s. They're like, don't move. That's what their neurologist is basically saying, like, don't do anything. And I think it's debunking that. I don't know how you do that, but that does need to shift move the needle.
Absolutely. And to answer your question, the whole reason I started the Real Talk MS podcast was to make the amazing research that's taking place today more accessible by talking about it in plain English. And while Real Talk MS reaches thousands of people in more than 100 countries, there are a lot more people that still aren't hearing the conversations we have every week on the podcast. Veronica, let me ask you the same question. What do you think has to happen to get more folks with MS exercising?
I think what we have to do is to simplify it. Most people sometimes think that you have to go to a gym to honestly get exercise in, but it doesn't have to be. It could be fundamental daily activity to get you moving and get your body just activating. And that's the mindset that we have to get people into. Because a lot of people do not want to go to a gym. They feel intimidated. They feel like it's just way too many people since we are past post pandemic now, So just getting people to really think more consciously about their daily movement and how that can help them in order to combat MS and to become stronger. And as I mentioned earlier before, fundamental things, daily cleaning, exercising, dancing while you're vacuuming, reaching to the cupboard, doing calf lifts. Those little small things can help down the line. So just to get people just to start really thinking about just small little things, 5 minutes can lead to 10 minutes, 10 minutes can lead to 15, 15 to 30, just incorporating those small little things to make them active is important. And I think that would help is to get people mindset to stop thinking I have to go big, because you don't have to go big. Even small helps.
Veronica Lewis, Luis Guerra, thanks for spending a few minutes talking with me today.
Love it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to hear more about the amazing MS research that's taking place in laboratories all around the world, I hope you'll join me every week for the Real Talk MS podcast.